Imagine walking through a premier Canadian shopping mall. You bypass the luxury boutiques and step into the bright, thumping atmosphere of a Sport Chek where teenagers are agonizing over the latest release of $200 basketball shoes. Down the hall, a young professional is dropping serious cash on a highly technical winter jacket at Helly Hansen. Across town, a tradesman is picking up a pair of industrial steel-toe boots at Markus, while a parent scrambles through Party City for a helium balloon bouquet. These environments are vibrant, specialized, and perfectly calibrated to serve vastly different consumer demographics. Now, drive out to the sprawling concrete expanses of the outer suburbs and walk through the automatic doors of a Canadian Tire. The air smells distinctly of vulcanized rubber, motor oil, and fertilizer. Customers are hauling massive metal carts loaded with heavy-duty socket sets, cast-iron cookware, and industrial jugs of windshield washer fluid. The people shopping here are pragmatic homeowners and weekend mechanics seeking pure utility. On the surface, these retail ecosystems operate in entirely different dimensions. The teenager buying a moisture-wicking shirt and the skier buying a waterproof shell have absolutely no idea their money is flowing directly into the exact same bank account as the guy buying a Mastercraft drill press. This is the story of how a hardware and automotive parts retailer spent a century quietly transforming into an invisible monopoly. They evolved from a tiny Toronto garage into a diversified corporate titan that touches almost every aspect of Canadian daily life, systematically executing some of the most lucrative takeovers in modern commerce. By weaponizing their massive logistics network and deploying billions in capital, they silently conquered entirely new industries without the public ever catching on. Their story begins back in 1922, when brothers John W. and Alfred J. Billes scraped together their combined life savings of $1,800 to buy a tiny operation called Hamilton Tire and Garage. The timing was fortunate, as the automobile was rapidly shifting from an expensive novelty into a mandatory middle-class utility, presenting a massive opportunity to service an exploding market. However, surviving those early days proved to be a brutal challenge. The brothers were leasing their Toronto property month to month and moving very few tires, forcing them to rent out their empty garage space to local doctors and lawyers just to safely store their vehicles and keep the lights on. They knew that building absolute customer trust was the only way to outlast their better funded competitors. Because tire blowouts were a constant reality and a major source of anxiety for early drivers in the 1920s, the brothers introduced an unconditional guarantee on their entire inventory. They actively undercut the local market on price while promising absolute reliability, a strategy that quickly transformed their struggling garage into a highly trusted community hub. That influx of local business generated the capital needed to launch something brilliant in 1928. They mailed out a comprehensive price list that intentionally doubled as a provincial roadmap for drivers, effectively creating the early 20th century equivalent of a frictionless online storefront. The catalog allowed them to reach Canadians far beyond the city limits and start shipping automotive parts to remote towns across Ontario and the Maritimes. The company expanded relentlessly over the ensuing decades on the back of this delivery network, rolling out a nationwide web of dealer-operated stores that successfully monopolized the automotive aftermarket. Owning that automotive market gave the Billes brothers a front row seat to a massive cultural shift. They noticed that the car was fundamentally changing how Canadians actually lived. Families started using their vehicles to escape urban centers for weekend camping trips, and they began commuting from brand new suburban neighborhoods that required constant maintenance. The brothers saw a highly lucrative opportunity in this movement. They reasoned that if a customer already trusted them to supply a reliable set of tires for a road trip, they could easily sell them the canvas tent for the campsite and the lawnmower for the new backyard. They systematically expanded their inventory to supply the exact lifestyle that the automobile had just enabled. This strategic evolution transformed their early garages into sprawling retail warehouses, turning Canadian Tire into the default destination for the practical household. The stores became the automatic choice for anyone needing a replacement headlight alongside a new set of patio furniture. To lock down this new suburban empire, they opened their first gas bars in 1958 and introduced a customer retention tool that would become a literal national icon. Canadian Tire Money was a proprietary loyalty currency where a customer would receive physical, colourful paper bills alongside their regular cash change. These notes functioned exactly like real money, provided you were spending them exclusively at Canadian Tire. The shoppers would routinely hoard thick stacks of this unique currency in their car glove boxes, watching the value quietly compound over several months. This created a massive psychological pull to return, knowing they could eventually walk into the hardware section and buy a new toaster or a fishing rod outright using only the fake money they'd collected. The executives successfully engineered a self-sustaining financial loop that reliably brought millions of shoppers back for the mundane essentials of domestic life, quietly building the massive capital reserves needed to eventually hunt for much larger prey. While that closed-loop paper money system worked flawlessly for decades to keep practical homeowners tethered to the brand, it inadvertently created a massive demographic blind spot. The executives sitting in the Toronto headquarters looked at their balance sheets in the late 1990s and saw a highly profitable business, but a deeper dive into their actual foot traffic revealed a terrifying reality. The people walking through the automatic doors to collect those colorful bills were almost exclusively older homeowners and weekend hennymen picking up supplies for their next driveway project. By so thoroughly cornering the market on domestic chores, the brand had accidentally alienated massive segments of the retail sector. They allowed younger demographics and fashion-conscious shoppers to spend billions of dollars in disposable income everywhere else. Canadian Tire obviously sold basic work clothes and entry-level sporting goods at the time. However, their inventory possessed zero credibility with consumers looking for specialized gear. You simply can't convince a construction worker to buy high-end safety boots or a teenager to buy premium athletic wear when those items are displayed right next to the plumbing supplies and discounted paper towels. The hardware giant was physically and culturally isolated from the people they desperately needed to attract to secure their long-term future. To compound this crisis, the Canadian retail landscape was bracing for a massive shockwave from south of the border. Walmart was aggressively expanding across the country, eating away at the lower end of the general merchandise market using their enormous global purchasing power. Furthermore, the constant threat of Target expanding into the Canadian market loomed large, threatening to squeeze domestic margins even tighter. Stephen Wetmore, who would eventually take over as chief executive officer, recognized that playing a purely defensive strategy against American juggernauts was a guaranteed way to bleed out slowly. The company needed to rapidly diversify its revenue and build an impenetrable fortress around the Canadian customers. They executed their first major offensive maneuver in 2001 by purchasing Marks Work Warehouse for $116 million. Marks completely dominated the Canadian market for industrial safety wear and casual men's clothing, operating hundreds of standalone locations across the country. This acquisition proved that they didn't have to figure out how to sell trendy or specialized clothing inside a dusty hardware store. They realized they could deploy their massive capital reserves to buy up highly successful specialized retailers and tap into entirely new customer bases. By keeping the newly acquired brands physically separate from the hardware business, they could capture massive new revenue streams without ever forcing those shoppers to step foot inside a traditional Canadian Tire warehouse. While owning the blue-collar apparel market through Marks was a massive victory, Canadian Tire still lacked a direct pipeline to the most lucrative segment of the modern retail landscape, the youth-driven mall demographic. To solve this problem, they turned their attention to the Western provinces, where a completely different retail empire had been quietly dominating the market for decades. Back in 1974, John Forzani, a professional football player for the Calgary Stampeders, scraped together $9,000 with his brothers Joe and Tom, along with his best friend Bass Bark. The group opened a tiny sports shop on Calgary's 17th Avenue called Forzani's Locker Room. From the very beginning, the founders completely bypassed the broad utilitarian approach favored by traditional department stores and focused intensely on specialized athletic gear. Because they were active, professional athletes, they understood exactly what customers required for peak performance, allowing them to bring a highly credible level of expertise directly to the sales floor. They built their early reputation on pure authenticity, refusing to stop cheap, mass-produced sporting goods in favor of providing the exact same high-caliber equipment used by players on the field. This credibility translated into explosive commercial growth throughout the 1980s and 90s. The Forzani Group aggressively expanded across the country by specifically securing premium real estate inside enclosed shopping malls. The executives in Calgary recognized early on that sports retail was rapidly morphing into fashion retail. Young people were increasingly treating athletic shoes and branded hoodies as high-priced status symbols rather than simple gym wear, and Forzani capitalized heavily on this massive cultural shift. They built enormous, highly energetic storefronts designed to feel like exciting, youth-driven destinations, complete with booming music and specialized staff. By 2011, the Forzani Group had evolved into an absolute titan of Canadian retail. They operated more than 500 retail outlets across the country and boasted an incredibly diverse portfolio of specialized banners, including Sport Chek, Sports Experts, Atmosphere, and National Sports. Generating roughly $1.4 billion in annual revenue, the Calgary-based company commanded the undisputed #1 position in the national sporting goods market. If a teenager in Canada wanted the latest release of high-end basketball sneakers from Nike or Adidas, they were almost certainly handing their cash to a Forzani-owned property, proving they had successfully monopolized the exact youth demographic and the exact premium product categories that Canadian Tire desperately needed to survive. The corporate trajectories of these two wildly different retail ecosystems collided that same year. Canadian Tire was sitting on massive capital reserves, but urgently required a fast track to the premium sports market to build a defensive wall against the looming American retail invasion. Out west, the Forzani Group possessed the prime mall leases, the coveted youth demographic, and the right supplier relationships, yet they were hitting the financial limits of managing hundreds of expensive physical storefronts. Their executives knew they could benefit immensely from the logistical firepower and deep pockets of a giant parent company to fuel their next phase of aggressive expansion, creating a perfect marriage of convenience. On May 9, 2011, the hardware giant shocked the financial press by launching a friendly, all-cash takeover of the entire Forzani operation. They placed a staggering $771 million bid on the table, offering $26.5 for every outstanding Class A common share. This represented a massive 45% premium over Forzani's stock price from the previous week, proving exactly how serious Canadian Tire CEO Stephen Wetmore was about securing the deal. He engineered this overwhelming payout intentionally to lock down the acquisition quickly. By flooding the table with cash right from the outset, Canadian Tire effectively scared off circling private equity firms and completely neutralized any chance of a protracted, expensive bidding war. The rationale behind handing over nearly $1 billion came down to a brilliant lack of cannibalization within the sports market itself. While Canadian Tire was considered a premier sports retailer in the country, their actual product overlap with Forzani was virtually non-existent. Canadian Tire completely dominated the entry-level hard goods market, filling their warehouse aisles with bulky camping stoves, cast iron free weights, affordable bicycles, and beginner hockey skates. Meanwhile, the Forzani mall stores dominated the premium soft goods and elite equipment market, moving incredible volumes of moisture-wicking apparel, expensive running shoes, and top-tier technical outerwear. By swallowing the Forzani Group whole, Canadian Tire instantly united the largest sporting goods chains in the country under a single corporate umbrella. They secured total dominance, and they pulled it off without having to redesign a single suburban store layout or risk alienating their loyal, hardware-focused customer base. When corporate giants spend nearly $1 billion acquiring a rival, the usual next step is to smash the two businesses together to slash overhead. Canadian Tire avoided this fatal error through an absolute masterclass in brand isolation. They knew that if they pasted their own logo onto those mall storefronts or tried selling high-end Nike basketball shoes next to snow shovels and motor oil, they would instantly vaporize the cool factor they'd just paid a fortune to acquire. So instead, they left the customer-facing experience entirely untouched and operated the Forzani chains as a completely separate business unit. They kept the Sport Chek signs securely above the doors and ensured the specialized athletic staff remained on the payroll. While Forzani's executive leadership stepped down to allow Canadian Tire's acquisition head, Michael Medline, take over as president, the customer-facing experience was deliberately left entirely untouched. A teenager buying a new snowboard had absolutely no reason to suspect they were actually handing their money to the local hardware giant. But while the storefronts remained perfectly isolated, the back of the house was subjected to a ruthless consolidation. This hidden operational crossover is where Canadian Tire extracted the real financial value from the merger. They immediately combined their international supply chains, weaponizing their massive new purchasing power to squeeze significantly better deals out of global manufacturers. Canadian Tire already owned one of the most sophisticated distribution networks in North America, built specifically to move heavy freight across a massive, sparsely populated country. By plugging Forzani's inventory directly into this logistical beast, they instantly stripped out millions in redundant shipping, warehousing, and administrative costs. Generating a projected $25 million in annual savings, they created the ultimate retail hybrid. The trendy face of a mall boutique, secretly powered by the high-volume logistics engine of a big box hardware store. With the hardware, workwear, and sporting goods sectors firmly under their control, Canadian Tire realized their holding company model could be applied to virtually any lucrative retail category. They abandoned their identity as a simple domestic hardware shop and began aggressively hunting for new vertical monopolies to add to their portfolio. In 2018, they executed their most ambitious international play to date by purchasing the Norwegian sportswear and workwear brand Helly Hansen for a staggering $985 million. This was a massive departure from their usual strategy of buying domestic storefronts. Helly Hansen was a prestigious global brand known for outfitting professional sailors, ski patrollers, and extreme outdoor enthusiasts. Canadian Tire had previously been one of Helly Hansen's largest retail partners, selling their jackets and boots inside Markus and Sport Chek locations. By acquiring the entire brand outright, Canadian Tire gained total control over the manufacturing margins and instantly secured a massive footprint in international wholesale markets across Europe and the United States. A year later, they pivoted entirely away from apparel and targeted the highly lucrative celebration market. In August 2019, they acquired Party City's Canadian operations for $174 million, handing them 65 massive retail locations dedicated entirely to balloons, costumes, and party supplies. The corporate logic was straightforward. They knew their core demographic consisted of families with children, and those exact families reliably spent heavily on birthdays and holidays every single year. By absorbing Party City Canada into the empire, they captured yet another massive chunk of the average family's annual discretionary spending, further insulating their balance sheet against economic downturns in the hardware or automotive sectors. But managing a portfolio that spanned hardware, industrial workwear, mall sneakers, and party supplies is not easy. It required a unified strategy to prevent leaving millions of dollars of cross-promotional revenue on the table. To extract maximum value from this empire, the company phased out the old and untraceable Canadian Tire paper money and replaced it with a digitized system called the Triangle Rewards Program, which linked the entire corporate portfolio under a single loyalty card. This transition gave them direct visibility into consumer habits across entirely different retail sectors. The system now tracks a shopper buying brake pads, steel-toe boots, and a balloon bouquet, using that detailed profile to actively incentivize cross-brand purchases which effectively traps the customer inside a closed-loop ecosystem, blocking cash from leaking out to competitors like Amazon. Operating a digital ecosystem of that scale demanded a massive technological foundation, which exposed a severe vulnerability behind the scenes. For years, the legacy online ordering system was a disjointed mess. Because the company operated on a franchise model with hundreds of independently owned dealers, tracking live inventory across the country was a logistical nightmare. To fix this, the boardroom authorized an incredible $3.4 billion investment to reconstruct their omni-channel retail system. This massive injection of capital physically rewired distribution centers, upgraded real-time tracking, and built a seamless digital bridge between the website and the physical shelves. The immense financial success of this modernized empire ultimately gave Canadian Tire the capital and confidence to step into an entirely new corporate role as the protector of Canadian retail heritage. They proved this ambition in 2025 by acquiring the intellectual property of the Hudson Bay Company. When the oldest commercial corporation in North America faced severe financial restructuring, Canadian Tire spent $30 million to purchase the rights to the iconic HBC stripes and the historic Zellers trademark. This move was deeply symbolic. They had totally transcended their origins as a simple automotive garage on Gerrard Street, transforming into a massive holding company capable of rescuing and monetizing the very brands that helped found the nation. If you want to learn more about Hudson Bay and Zellers, we've done videos diving deep into their rise and fall, and you should definitely watch those after this. Links will be in the description or click right here. When you examine Canadian Tire's expansion over the last 2 decades, the strategy is remarkably straightforward. They realized early on that selling high-end fashion, technical sports gear, and party supplies out of a warehouse store would never work. Instead, they used their capital and existing logistics network to buy established players in adjacent industries, building a retail machine heavily insulated from global competitors. The core of this takeover strategy is its invisibility. By intentionally keeping the Canadian Tire name off the buildings they acquire, they preserve the specialized environments modern Canadians expect. This approach allowed them to build an empire that touches almost every aspect of Canadian domestic life, quietly dominating the retail space without triggering the backlash that usually accompanies massive retail monopolies. But what do you reckon? Does knowing that Sport Chek, Markus, Party City, and Helly Hansen are all run by the exact same company that sells your windshield wipers change how you view those brands? Do you prefer the highly specialized feel of a standalone mall boutique, or are you just happy to collect your Triangle Rewards points across the board? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. I always love reading them and getting new perspectives. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden machinery of Canadian retail, give us a like, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next video. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching and stay curious.